All right, good morning to all of you. We're so glad you're here. What do I have right here? What is a question mark? There it is up there too, so everybody else out there can see it too. Who here likes to ask questions? Does anybody here like to ask questions? What do you like? What's a good question to ask?
Why is Jesus alive?
Why is Jesus alive? Yeah. That'll get you into seminary. Who here has a good question? Anybody else have a question you want to ask? You know what kind of questions I asked when I was your age? I wrote them down right here. Do I have to eat this? Have you ever asked that question? Yeah? Here's another one I used to ask. Ready? Are you ready for this? Do I have to go to bed now? Ooh. Did you ever ask any questions, Kayla?
I did, yeah.
Yeah? Look.
Yeah, I would ask, what could I do to help?
Oh.
No, I'm kidding.
Oh, my God.
No, I'll tell you the question I used to ask.
What did you ask?
Can I get a new outfit?
Can I get a new outfit? Oh, my gosh.
Shallow.
That's a good one. How about you, Heather?
Yeah, I always ask, when do I get my allowance?
When do I get my allowance? That's a good one. Does everybody here want to hold a question? There's a question. There. I hope I have enough. There's a question. There you go. There's a question. There's a question. And a question. You get a question. Everybody gets a question. And you even get a question all the way back there. All right, now, here's the thing. We're going to hear some scripture that Erin is going to read right now. And she's going to read a story from a man named Job in the Bible. And in this story, Job is having a conversation with God. And Job asks, how many questions? 6 questions in 6 verses. That's a lot of questions. So every time you hear Erin, watch Erin, maybe she'll look over at us. Every time you hear Erin ask a question, raise your question mark, okay? All right, are you ready? Here we go.
A reading from Job, chapter 7, verses 11 and 17 through 21. Therefore, I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. What are human beings that you make so much of them, that you set your mind on them, visit them every morning, test them every moment? Will you not look away from me for a little while? Let me alone until I swallow my spittle? If I sin, what do I do to you, you watcher of humanity? Why have you made me your target? Why have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I shall lie in the earth. You will seek me, but I shall not be. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Thanks be to God. So here's the thing about this scripture. Job asks 6 questions, and who's he asked the question to? God. He asked all of his questions to God. And that tells us that it's no matter what your question is, it's okay to ask your question to God. It's okay. And so you can take your question mark home this week, and when you have a question for your parents this week, your mom or your dad or anybody, go. Go to it. Go raise that question. So if you're looking for something to take home with you from this time together, I suggest you take home your bulletin and cut out the words to "There is a light" and hang that on your refrigerator this week. The wounds of life, they bring healing, my friend, for the heart that breaks is but opening again. I think that's worth taking home. So about Job, hear what the Spirit is saying to the church, and I want to go, really? Really? The Old Testament book of Job is called wisdom literature. mean, there's something really smart in Job that we're supposed to catch. That there's something in Job that we're supposed to reflect upon. As Job experiences his personal problems and just these quandaries of life, we're supposed to take all of that and we're supposed to reflect upon it in ways that give us some wisdom about our faith. And so in Job, the reflection is ultimate. All 40-some chapters are filled with stories of Job and his reflection upon his life. And some say it's a reflection upon the problem of evil. You know, why is there evil in the world? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. But whatever it is, Job has a whole lot of problems upon which to reflect. And here's the thing about the story. Job is supposed to handle, I call him a bucket load of problems, and he's supposed to handle his bucket load of problems gracefully. Now, is that something that we humans do naturally? Handle our problems gracefully and in ways that are kind and in ways that keep us connected to each other and keep us connected to God. So Job is supposed to do this in ways that don't blame anybody. I don't know about you, but when I get a problem, I'm kind of near blaming somebody. You ever been that way? And so Job is supposed to keep from laying blame, particularly upon God. And it is only in so doing, by not blaming God, that Job remains, the word the writer used, is righteous. Job is to remain righteous. That's really important to the story. And Job is to remain without sin. So it is from this drama of Job, and it is a drama, that our faith wisdom that we're supposed to reflect upon is to emerge from the story. So one day, God's out there meeting with God's court. Did you know that? God has a court. Apparently, in the story of Job, God consults with a court. And there are members on the court. And one of the members on the court goes by the name of Satan. Now imagine that. God has somebody by the name of Satan on the court, which causes you to think, well, is this Satan the real Satan? Or who is this Satan? And why would God have somebody like Satan on God's court to consult with? And before you can ever start thinking about what answers might be to those questions you're reflecting on, the next thing you find out in this story is that Job gets handed over to Satan. God hands over Job to Satan. Here, he's yours. Do with him. Take him. And this handing over to Satan just happens to coincide with, shall we say, a streak of bad luck in Job's life. All in one day. This happens all in one day. The first thing that happens is he loses his livestock, which means he loses his what? Source of income, which means he loses his livelihood. Next thing that happens, he loses those he loves. He loses all of his sons and his daughters. In one moment, they're all gone. And then the day ends with a gust of wind. And a gust of wind comes and it destroys his home and it destroys everyone who's in it, all in one day. But wait, we all know the faith wisdom, don't we? God will never give you more than you can handle. We know that wisdom. Isn't that a bit of faith wisdom that Job should know? And that's why he can handle all of those problems. And so it is, several weeks later, God meets up with Satan again. They don't meet just once in this story. They meet several times. And God meets Satan again. And God gives Job over to Satan's power again. Which raises a question or two, doesn't it? Again? But before you can ponder an answer to the question it raises, again, Job this time is inflicted with sores, all the way from his feet to his head, says the story. So in other words, his entire body is covered with sores. His entire body aches. But we know the wisdom, don't we? God will never give you more than you can handle. Never. Or Mother Teresa refined it this way. I know God will not give me anything I can't handle. I just wish that God didn't trust me so much. But it is reasonable to ask this. If God never gives us more than we can handle, why is life so hard? You know, there are very few amongst us. In fact, I can say nobody. Nobody makes it through life without encountering hard moments. Some of you probably have really full buckets right now. Some of us are fewer. But nobody gets through life without encountering some full, hard bucket moments. Problems that, like Job, test our ability to be kind and to be graceful and not to lay blame at somebody else's feet. And test our ability, more importantly, test our ability to live a life that's fully connected to our faith and to God. About this connection, it's even been said that, and you can purchase this at the end of the service. Gayla is selling these for $2.50 now to put on your refrigerator. Sometimes God gives us more than we can handle, so we will surrender to Him. Think so? Nothing like surrendering to God to solidify your sinless and righteous connection. So if I follow this wisdom right, let's look at this wisdom thread. God will never give you more than you can handle. I know God will not give me anything I can't handle. I just wish God didn't trust me so much. Well, if God never gives me more than I can handle, why is life so hard? There you go. So that we'll surrender our will to God's will, and thereby we can live in a perfect relationship with God. If you were in this sanctuary on October the 15th of 2013, that would be just not quite 6 years ago. If you were here on October 15th, you heard Rachel Held Evans talk right here in this sanctuary. At the time, there she is, she was 32. She was 32 then, and it was her life story and her relationship, her connection with God that brought her to this room, brought her to Asbury. Rachel Held Evans was born in Alabama, and then her family later moved to Tennessee, Dayton, Tennessee. And her story says she was raised in an evangelical home, whatever that is. I was raised in a Methodist home. And she was raised in an evangelical home. She received a bachelor's degree from college in English. She went to Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee. Now that's important because it was in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925 that John Scopes was found guilty of teaching evolution in the public school. We know this, history says this is the Scopes monkey trial. John Scopes taught that humans evolved from monkeys. And so he was found guilty of teaching this because you weren't supposed to teach that in 1925. His verdict was later overturned on a technicality. Well, 5 years later, Bryan College was founded, and it dedicated itself to teaching from a Christian perspective, meaning it dedicated itself to teaching, let's just say, not about evolution. And so this is the school that Rachel Held Evans went to and that she graduated from. And so while she was in school, she began to question her school's teachings that shunned evolution. And shortly after graduating from college, she published her first book. The name of her first book was Evolving in Monkeytown. Think about it. Not a bad title. Or she also called it Faith Unraveled. And she continued on. She wrote and she wrote and she wrote, and she always wrote. No matter what she always wrote about her love for the church. And she always wrote about her love for the Bible, the very book that was used to find John Scopes guilty of teaching evolution. So Held Evans' second book became a national bestseller. And her sense of humor and wit, paired with what I call her theological scholarship, broke down walls. And it broke down barriers in ways that nobody else had been able to do. And it created space for a more open and a progressive expression of our Christian faith. Not just here in this room, but even in the evangelical tradition. And so it was at this point Rachel Held Evans came to Asbury in 2013, and she spoke right here. The place was full. The room was full of people that, 3/4 of people I'd never seen before in my life. We advertised it, and this place was full. Last month in April, Rachel Held Evans caught the flu, the very beginning of April. And then mid-month, she developed a urinary tract infection. And so her bucket of problems was what? It was filling up, wasn't it? Full, full, full. And so the faith thread of absolute reason that is before us today would suggest right there at that point, it was time for Rachel Held Evans to surrender to God's will. Just give it over to God so that God might better handle her problems. On April the 14th, this last month, on April 14th, she tweeted this. If you're the praying type, I'm in the hospital with a flu and UTI combo and a severe allergic reaction to the antibiotics they gave me. And then parenthetically she added, I'm totally going to miss Game of Thrones. Sad face. Within days, though, her bucket wasn't just full, her bucket was overflowing. The allergic reaction had led to a series of seizures. And so doctors decided the best thing to do for her was to put her into a medically induced coma. And on Friday night, May 3rd, Reverend Nadia Boltz-Weber, who also spoke here during the last 5 years to a full room, she came to visit Rachel Held Evans that night, and she anointed her with oil. And the next morning, surrounded by family and friends, Rachel Held Evans died, leaving behind her husband, Dan, of 16 years. She married him right after she graduated from Bryan. They met in college together. And she leaves behind 2 children, ages 1 and 3. Now, because many of her followers are millennial, and you might be thinking, well, what's millennial? And it's not many of you. It is some of us. But millennial, 37, give or take 10, And so because many of her followers are millennial, pre and post, they are very adept at expressing themselves where? Online, right? They can figure it out. I can't. But they're very adept at, I can't even order food online. They're very adept at expressing themselves online. And so last week I went and I looked, and there are all these Christian chat rooms that you can get in. And Christian chat rooms were filled with reaction to the death of Rachel Held Evans. So this week I started reading thread after thread after thread of comments. One said this: I mean, if this happens to Rachel Held Evans, and if the psalmists were writing today, I think they very well might ask God, what's the point? Really, what is the point? And then this one: if God never gives us more than we can handle, I now have a reason to never go to church again. You know, life can challenge our faith absolutes in ways that leave us really disappointed and distressed. God never gives us more than we can handle. Try telling that to Rachel Held Evans' family and friends. Try posting that on a thread of comments in a millennial Christian chat room and see how far that gets you. Rachel Held Evans spent most of her short adult lifetime confronting those misguided absolutes, the ones that we find in church, the ones that we think must be in the Bible. Yet in the deep grief of her death, many of those who followed her feel let down and left out, because an absolute understanding of God's nature to not give us more than we can handle was revealed to be false and misguided. And then there's Job. Old Testament belief, actually even Christian belief, is as though Jesus never lived and walked into our lives and ate with us and held us and forgave us. But Old Testament belief holds that one pays a price for their sins. You pay a price for your wayward conduct, meaning that in God's absolute power, God is going to dish out punishment for your behavior. Yet Job's drama says repeatedly what? What does it say? Over and over again. Over and over again. Job was righteous. Job was righteous. Job was without sin. Job was righteous. Job was without sin. There's a thread of biblical scholarship that maintains the sole purpose of Job was written not to tell us about evil or theodicy or any of those big words, but the sole purpose of Job was written to correct a misguided absolute about a punishing God. I mean, what kind of God dishes out more than you can handle problems on a sinless Job? What kind of God would do that? It's a wonder that Job ever went to church again or temple or wherever he went. It's a wonder that Job ever continued to seek a connection with God. I read this week in a Christian chat room that was full of thoughts about Rachel Held Evans. The writer wrote this: I don't mean to short circuit your anger or your grief. Because anger and grief is important to moving on. I don't mean to short circuit your anger or grief, but you need to set aside your absolute beliefs for a moment. Set them aside. They are only serving to deepen your angst and disappointment. Your sorrow that you have now will not be comforted by them. Instead, use your time to ponder how God makes God's self real in your life. Because you need a real God right now. In the final chapter of Job, it's not an absolute belief that comforts Job. If you can make it all the way through those 40-some chapters without giving up on the story, you'll get to that last chapter. And you'll find it's his family and friends who bring him comfort. Here's what the story says. Then they came to him. All of his brothers and sisters, all who had known him before. And they ate bread with Job in his house. They showed him sympathy and they comforted him. They became evidence of a real God. God doesn't dish out punishment. God doesn't dish out problems to all of us so that we can just surrender our will to God. God sends people into our lives so that we might be connected to God. God dishes out love. The story then says, after Job is surrounded by his family and friends, the story then says, Job's fortunes were restored. What's that mean? Something to ponder, something to reflect upon. Well, it certainly wasn't his past that was restored, was it? His future was restored? Through family and friends? God will never give you more than you can handle. No way. No how. That's not true. God is more real than that. Or as Job says halfway through the story, I know my Redeemer lives. Thanks be to God on this Sunday morning. Amen.